You owe me an apology.
Yes, I do. I owe all of you an apology. This episode is marred with some audio artifacts. Essentially, it's going to sound like I'm traveling on a bumpy road or something. I know what I did. I won't do it again. You'll still be able to understand the words. It just gets weird every once in a while. For the most part, the audio's clean. Enjoy. Hello, people and bots. Welcome to part 9 of my reading of Project 2025. We're up to section 4, which is titled Department of Defense by Christopher Miller. As usual, I'm not going to edit very much of this, so you might hear some mouth noises or weird breaths, perhaps even a mistake or two. Here we go. The Constitution requires the federal government to provide for the common defense. It assigns to Congress the authority to raise and support armies, and to provide and maintain a navy, and specifies that the President is Commander-in-Chief of America's armed forces. Ever since our founding, Americans have understood that the surest way to avoid war is to be prepared for it in peace. But when deterrence fails, we must fight and win. The Department of Defense, DoD, is the largest part of our federal government. It has almost 3 million people serving in uniform or a civilian capacity throughout the world and consumes approximately $850 billion annually, more than 50% of our government's discretionary spending. The DoD is also a deeply troubled institution. Historically, the military has been one of America's most trusted institutions, but years of sustained misuse, a two-tiered culture of accountability that shields senior officers and officials while exposing junior officers and soldiers in the field, wasteful spending, wildly shifting security policies, exceedingly poor discipline in program execution, and, most recently, the Biden administration's profoundly unserious equity agenda and vaccine mandates have taken a serious toll. Our disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan, which Trump set up, our impossibly muddled China strategy, the growing involvement of senior military officers in the political arena, and deep confusion about the purpose of our military are clear signals of a disturbing decay and markers of a dangerous decline in our nation's capabilities and will. Additionally, more than 100,000 Americans die annually in large measure because of illicit narcotics flows, more than 4 times as many people in 1 year as we lost in our 20-year war against Al-Qaeda. We are also witnessing a transformation in the character of war. The democratization of technology and the collapse of time and space require dramatic, thoughtful changes in how we defend, deter, and fight. Time and space are collapsing? What? As with any huge bureaucracy, and the DoD is one of the largest, breaking the status quo requires leadership and endurance. Technology is critical to maintaining our warfighting primacy, but we must be leery of the siren song that technology alone can protect us. More important is how new technologies are developed, tested, procured, and used, and that relies on the true competitive advantages of our people: ingenuity, common sense, and thoughtfulness grounded in a free society. Because war will continue to be the most stressful and consequential human endeavor, the most powerful weapon systems will remain the 6 inches between the ears of our citizens and the strength of their hearts and content of their souls. Military service is the most difficult task we ask of our citizens, and our nation is enormously blessed that so many young, patriotic Americans eagerly volunteer to carry such a heavy burden. We owe them everything, and we must do better. To do better, however, means recognizing and implementing 4 overriding priorities. Priority number 1, re-establish a culture of command accountability, non-politicization, and warfighting focus. Priority number 2, transform our armed forces for maximum effectiveness in an era of great power competition. Priority number 3, provide necessary support to Department of Homeland Security, DHS, border protection operations. Border protection is a national security issue that requires sustained attention and effort by all elements of the executive branch. Priority number 4, demand financial transparency and accountability. This chapter offers recommendations for improving our armed forces and the civilian organizations that support and oversee them. DoD policy. By far, the most significant danger to Americans' security, freedoms, and prosperity is China. China is, by any measure, the most powerful state in the world other than the United States itself. It apparently aspires to dominate Asia and then, from that position, become globally preeminent. If Beijing could achieve this goal, it could dramatically undermine America's core interests, including by restricting U.S. access to the world's most important market. Preventing this from happening must be the top priority for American foreign and defense policy. Beijing presents a challenge to American interests across the domains of national power, but the military threat that it poses is especially acute and significant. China is undertaking a historic military buildup that includes increasing capability for power projection, not only in its own region, but also far beyond, as well as a dramatic expansion of its nuclear forces that could result in a nuclear force that matches or exceeds America's own nuclear arsenal. The most severe immediate threat that Beijing's military poses, however, is to Taiwan and other U.S. allies along the first island chain in the Western Pacific. If China could subordinate Taiwan or allies like the Philippines, South Korea, and Japan, it could break apart any balancing coalition that is designed to prevent Beijing's hegemony over Asia. Accordingly, the United States must ensure that China does not succeed. This requires a denial defense, the ability to make the subordination of Taiwan or other U.S. allies in Asia prohibitively difficult. Critically, the United States must be able to do this at a level of cost and risk that Americans are willing to bear, given the relative importance of Taiwan to China and to the U.S. The United States and its allies also face real threats from Russia, as evidenced by Vladimir Putin's brutal war in Ukraine, as well as from Iran, North Korea, and transnational terrorism at a time when decades of ill-advised military operations in the greater Middle East, the atrophy of our defense industrial base, the impact of sequestration, and effective disarmament by many U.S. allies have exacted a high toll on America's military. This is a grim landscape. The United States needs to deal with these threats forthrightly and with strength, but it also needs to be realistic. It cannot wish away these problems. Rather, it must confront them with a clear-eyed recognition of the need for choice, discipline, and adequate resources for defense. In this light, U.S. defense strategy must identify China unequivocally as the top priority for U.S. defense planning, while modernizing and expanding the U.S. nuclear arsenal and sustaining an efficient and effective counterterrorism enterprise. U.S. allies must also step up, with some joining the United States in taking on China in Asia, while others take more of a lead in dealing with threats from Russia in Europe, Iran, the Middle East, and North Korea. The reality is that achieving these goals will require more spending on defense, both by the United States and by its allies, as well as active support for reindustrialization and more support for allies' productive capacity, so that we can scale our free world efforts together. Needed reforms. Prioritize a denial defense against China. U.S. defense planning should focus on China and, in particular, the effective denial defense of Taiwan. This focus and priority for U.S. defense activities will deny China the first island chain. 1. Require that all U.S. defense efforts, from force planning to employment and posture, focus on ensuring the ability of American forces to prevail in the pacing scenario and deny China a fait accompli against Taiwan. 2. Prioritize the U.S. conventional force planning construct to defeat a Chinese invasion of Taiwan before allocating resources to other missions, such as simultaneously fighting another conflict. Increase Allied conventional defense burden sharing. U.S. allies must take far greater responsibility for their conventional defense. U.S. allies must play their part not only in dealing with China, but also in dealing with threats from Russia, Iran, and North Korea. 1. Make burden sharing a central part of U.S. defense strategy, with the United States not just helping allies to step up, but strongly encouraging them to do so. 2. Support greater spending and collaboration by Taiwan and allies in the Asia-Pacific, like Japan and Australia, to create a collective defense model. 3. Transform NATO so that U.S. allies are capable of fielding the great majority of the conventional forces required to deter Russia, while relying on the United States primarily for our nuclear deterrent, and select other capabilities while reducing the U.S. force posture in Europe. 4. Sustain support for Israel, even as America empowers Gulf partners to take responsibility for their own coastal, air, and missile defenses both individually and working collectively. 5. Enable South Korea to take the lead in its conventional defense against North Korea. Implement nuclear modernization and expansion. The United States manifestly needs to modernize, adapt, and expand its nuclear arsenal. Russia maintains and is actively brandishing a very large nuclear arsenal, but China is also undertaking a historic nuclear breakout. 1. Expand and modernize the U.S. nuclear force so that it has the size, sophistication, and tailoring to deter Russia and China simultaneously. 2. Develop a nuclear arsenal with the size, sophistication, and tailoring, including new capabilities at the theater level, to ensure that there is no circumstance in which America is exposed to serious nuclear coercion. And my throat's getting a little dry. I need a sip of my drink. Nothing fancy today, just grape and orange juice I blended myself. Increase Allied counter-terrorist burden sharing. Transnational terrorism remains a threat to Americans, even as we pivot toward Asia. 1. Sustain the military forces needed to deter, prevent, and combat terrorism, but at a sustainable cost in concert with other elements of national power and partner efforts. 2. Prioritize enhancing the capability of allies and partners to take the lead in combating terrorism in their regions. DoD Acquisition and Sustainment, A&S. The DoD's ability to acquire and field new, existing technologies is essential to the ability of America's military personnel to fight and win our nation's wars. To succeed in this endeavor, we must optimize the systems and personnel that the department uses, but the inflexible bureaucratic structure and risk-adverse culture that have developed over the decades make it difficult to provide the tools that warfighters need at the speed of relevance. The number one problem is the DoD budgeting process, instituted in 1961, that requires acquisition spending to be locked years in advance. Because technologies change so rapidly and requirements can change overnight, this creates situations in which military personnel not only go to war with outdated technology, but also may be fighting with equipment that is less capable than that of their competitors. America owes its military many things, and the most important is the resources they need to survive on the battlefield and carry out the tasks we ask of them. Needed reforms. Reform the planning, programming, budgeting, and execution process, PPBE. 1. Enhance funding and authority for DoD mission-focused innovation organizations and away from program-specific stovepipes that planned for and designed 2 or 3 years earlier may no longer be relevant. This allows the acquisition community to focus on portfolio management and move money around more easily instead of being locked into inflexible, multi-year procurement cycles. 2. The President should examine the recommendations of the congressionally mandated Commission on Planning, Programming, Budgeting, and Execution Reform, and develop a strategy for implementing those that the administration considers to be in the best interests of the American people. The Commission's final report is due on September 1st, 2023. 3. Develop legislation or other means of providing funding outside the traditional PPBE process for the prototyping and experimentation of emerging technologies that are deemed essential to modernization and future conflict. Consider creating a fast track for projects that satisfy the most pressing national security needs. 4. Require the Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment, the Undersecretary for Research and Engineering, and all service secretaries to conduct night court and use existing authorities to terminate outdated or underperforming programs so that money can be used for what works and will work. Require the undersecretaries and service secretaries to brief the secretary annually on the results. 5. Require the Office of the Secretary of Defense to research and report on the acquisition processes used by America's adversaries to improve our understanding of how they are often able to innovate and field new technologies on a faster timeline. Strengthen America's defense industrial base. 1. Replenish and maintain U.S. stockpiles of ammunition and other equipment that have been depleted as a result of U.S. support to Ukraine. This will strengthen the defense industry supply chain and ensure that adequate inventory exists if it is needed for a future conflict. 2. Collaborate with industry to develop a prioritized list of reforms that the DoD and Congress can enact and implement to incentivize industry to help America's military innovate and field needed capabilities. 3. Strengthen the ability of acquisition authorities to engage in multi-year procurements and block buys. This will improve private sector rates of return, thereby incentivizing defense contractors to partner with the government. It will also reduce government overhead by reducing the number of procurement competitions. 4. Prioritize the U.S. and allies under the domestic end product and domestic components requirements of the Build America, Buy America Act. Currently, defense companies are required to manufacture defense items for the U.S. government that are 100% domestically produced and at least 50% composed of domestically produced components. However, there are loopholes that allow companies to manufacture these items overseas. This can create supply chain and other issues, especially in wartime. Manufacturing components and end products domestically and with allies spurs factory development, increases American jobs, and builds resilience in America's defense industrial base. 5. Review the sectors currently prioritized for onshoring or friendshoring of manufacturing, kinetic capabilities, castings and forgings, critical materials, microelectronics, space, and electric vehicle batteries. Evaluate them according to the strategic landscape and expand or reprioritize the list as appropriate. 6. Help small businesses to become medium-sized and large vendors, which encourages a more resilient industrial base and fosters competition. Encourage and plan for durable supply chains for small businesses, so they also have commercial, private sector customers and are not solely dependent on defense orders, which can be highly specialized, expensive, and irregular. 7. Increase external engagement among small businesses to inform them of DoD's needs and how they could work with DoD to meet national security priorities. Optimize the DoD acquisition community. 1. Create incentives to emphasize speed and agility in decision-making for prototyping and program of record starts and terminations. Most bureaucrats would rather follow a checklist and fail than go outside the procedures and win, because failure means negative career repercussions. Senior acquisition leaders should design a system that allows decision makers to stay within the law but bypass unnecessary departmental regulations that are not in the best interest of the government and hamper the acquisition of capabilities that warfighters require. 2. The Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment, Undersecretary for Research and Engineering, and all service secretaries should assess their acquisition workforces, determine what additional personnel, resources, and training they need, and develop implementation plans. The goal is to develop, prototype, acquire, and field required capabilities at the speed of relevance to meet America's pacing threats and maintain a warfighting advantage. 3. Decentralize Defense Acquisition University (DAU) offerings and expand the DAU mission to include accreditation of non-DoD institutions. The critical shortage of trained and certified acquisition personnel must be addressed with urgency in order to support DoD mission objectives and goals. With the rapid evolution of training and educational technologies, including remote and virtual practices, there is no reason for DAU to maintain a monopoly on the knowledge and certification that are required to perform as acquisition professionals. Further, the cost to private contractors and non-DoD civilians who aspire to such a role limits the supply of trained and certified candidates. DAU has become an unnecessary barrier to entry in a career field that is vital to the DoD mission. DoD Research, Development, Test, and Evaluation, RDT&E. The FY 2017 National Defense Authorization Act established the position of Undersecretary of Defense for Research and Engineering and assigned broad responsibility for all defense research and engineering, technology development, technology transition, prototyping, experimentation, and developmental testing activities and programs, including the allocation of resources for defense research and unifying defense research and engineering efforts across the department, to the new Undersecretary, who also was tasked with serving as the principal advisor to the Secretary on all research, engineering, and technology development activities and programs in the department. This led to the single largest DoD structural change since the Goldwater-Nichols Act of 1986, and was organized effectively during President Donald Trump's administration. Needed reforms. Champion, engage, and focus on the American innovation ecosystem. To maintain leadership in the era of great power competition and succeed against our adversaries, a key DoD effort must be the creation of mechanisms and processes to embrace America's most significant competitive advantage: innovation. 1. Engage and leverage all of America's scientific, engineering, and high-tech production communities to research, develop, prototype, and rapidly deploy advanced technology capabilities on a continuing basis to preserve our warfighting advantage. 2. Increase integration and collaboration among the DoD, government labs, and private companies to solve the department's most difficult problems. 3. Reduce the number of critical technology areas from 14 to a more manageable number to concentrate effort and resources on those that bear directly on great power competition. 4. Rebuild RTD&E infrastructure that resides in Cold War era facilities and is not well suited to the current era of rapid development and testing of advanced technology and concepts to the maturity level necessary for acquisition and operational fielding. That is quite a sentence. Shall I read it again? Rebuild Rebuild RDT&E infrastructure that resides in Cold War era facilities and is not well suited to the current era of rapid development and testing of advanced technology and concepts to the maturity level necessary for acquisition and operational fielding. I'd love to force Donald Trump to read that sentence and then explain what it means. 5. Move toward a much more comprehensive independent risk reduction approach to increase understanding of the technical risks by drawing on the expertise in DoD laboratories and agencies to help acquisition programs succeed. Improve the rapid deployment of technology to the battlefield. America's military advantage has derived from the professionalism of our service members and our ability to manifest our technological advantage in battlefield capability. The current era of great power competition will continue for the foreseeable future, and technology will be the currency of competition. Our ability to prevail will rest on our ability to develop new technologies and move them onto the battlefield more rapidly than our adversaries can. 1. Accelerate the prototyping cycle to meet immediate battlefield needs. 2. Require tighter integration with user communities to provide value. 3. Establish a pipeline of near-term, mid-term, and long-term technology that is aimed at great power competition, China, and can be matured, prototyped, and evaluated to support major acquisitions, the ability to produce at scale, to break the cycle of schedule delays and cost overruns from underdeveloped and poorly understood technologies. 3. Develop a framework to protect the RTD&E enterprise from foreign exploitation. Strategic competition and adaptive adversaries require new thinking in how to protect technology. China has been relentless in stealing U.S. technology, using a full range of measures from influence operations to outright theft. This has been a major factor in its ability to close the gap, and in some cases, to exceed U.S. capabilities. 1. Implement a comprehensive approach to preserving U.S. technological leadership that is based on outpacing our adversaries, clear about what we need to protect, tailored to various specific sectors, for example, academia, the defense industrial base, and laboratories, and underpinned with a full range of consequences for attempted or actual theft. Have you noticed that there's no argument that any of this is even needed? It's just, we must do this. DoD foreign military sales. The United States must regain its role as the arsenal of democracy. In fiscal year 2021, U.S. government foreign military sales, FMS, nosedived to a low of $34.8 billion from a record high of $55.7 billion in 2018. This decrease hinders interoperability with partners and allies, decreases defense industrial base capacity, and increases the taxpayer burden on the U.S. military's own procurements. Under previous administrations, the United States built its reputation as a reliable partner with a strong defense industrial base that could supply military articles and goods in a timely manner. Today's FMS process is encumbered by Byzantine bureaucracy, long contracting times, high costs, and mundane technology. The United States can change this downward trajectory by improving internal processes that incentivize partners and allies to procure U.S. defense systems, thereby expanding our defense ecosystem. We must reverse the recent dip in FMS to ensure both that our partners remain interoperable with the United States and that our defense industrial base regains much-needed capacity in preparation for future challenges. Needed reforms. Emphasize exportability with U.S. procurements. The record low FMS sales in 2021 were driven partly by the high costs of converting weapon systems on the back end of production, rather than emphasizing exportability in initial capability planning. 1. Ensure that senior U.S. military leadership emphasizes exportability in the initial development of defense systems that are both available and interoperable with our partners and allies. 2. Create a funding mechanism to incentivize exportability in initial planning, which can be recouped after future FMS transactions. End informal congressional notification. Informal congressional notification, or tiered review, is a hindrance to ensuring timely sales to our global partners. The tiered review process is not codified in law. It is merely a practice by which the Department of State provides a preview of prospective arms transfers before Congress is formally notified. 1. End the tiered review process to eliminate at least 20 days from the FMS process. 2. Use the tiered review process only when unanimous congressional support is guaranteed in order to eliminate the weaponization by select members of Congress that has prevented billions of dollars of arms sales from moving into formal congressional notification. Minimize barriers to collaboration. The high cost of developing advanced defense platforms requires the United States to collaborate with key allies to minimize waste, complement strengths, and supplement our defense industrial base to create a system that is greater than that of the United States alone. 1. Enhance defense industrial base planning with partners to allow them to focus on niche areas where there are cost advantages for the United States. 2. Decrease international traffic in arms regulations, ITAR, to facilitate trade with such allies as the United Kingdom, Canada, and Australia. 3. Create opportunities to improve the health of the defense supply chain with added opportunities for partners and allies to contribute. Reform the FMS contracting process. The contracting timeline for the FMS process is shockingly slow. On average, the DoD contracting timeline takes approximately 18 months because of slow bureaucratic processes and chronic understaffing. 1. Immediately fund more contracting capacity in all services to decrease the contracting timeline and improve the delivery of defense articles to our global partners. 2. Rationalize and speed arms sales decision-making to preclude our enemies from exploiting bureaucratic slothfulness and allow us to manage the development of indigenous defense industrial bases. DoD personnel. The men and women of America's armed forces are the most critical component of our national defense strategy, but in recent years, they have been overextended, undervalued, and insufficiently resourced. Their families help them to carry the burden of service, but the assistance they receive is disproportionately less than the sacrifices they make. Young civilians who would thrive in a military environment are disenfranchised when educators and influencers discourage them from learning about military service and preparing for the honor of wearing America's uniform. The United States military is an extraordinary institution, staffed by exceptional people who have defended our nation and changed the course of history. But the Biden administration, through word and deed, has treated the armed forces as just another place to work. We must restore our military to a place of honor and respect and recruit and retain the individuals who will meet the rigorous standards of excellence that are required for membership in the world's greatest fighting force. Needed reforms. Rescue recruiting and retention. Recruiting was the worst in 2022 that it has been in 2 generations, and is expected to be even worse in 2023. Some of the problems are self-inflicted and ongoing. The recruiting problem is not service-specific. It affects the entire joint force. 1. Appoint a special assistant to the President who will maintain liaison with Congress, DoD, and all other interested parties on the issue of recruiting and retention. 2. Improve recruiting by suspending the use of the recently introduced MHS Genesis system that uses private medical records of potential recruits at military entrance processing stations, MEPS, creating unnecessary delays and unwarranted rejections. 3. Improve military recruiters' access to secondary schools and require completion of the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery. ASVAB, the military entrance examination by all students in schools that receive federal funding. 4. Encourage members of Congress to provide time to military recruiters during each town hall session in their congressional districts. 5. Increase the number of junior ROTC programs in secondary schools. Restore standards of lethality and excellence. Entrance criteria for military service and specific occupational career fields should be based on the needs of those positions. Exceptions for individuals who are already predisposed to require medical treatment, for example, HIV positive or suffering from gender dysphoria, should be removed, and those with gender dysphoria should be expelled from military service. Physical fitness requirements should be based on the occupational field without consideration of gender, race, ethnicity, or orientation. These pigs are so afraid of people who are not straight. It's amazing to me. Can anyone tell me of a single instance where a trans person has ruined a military operation simply on the basis that they were trans? Anyone? Eliminate politicization, reestablish trust and accountability, and restore faith to the force. Okay, that's not good. In 2021, the Reagan National Defense Survey found that only 45% of Americans have a great deal of trust and confidence in the military, down from 70% in 2018. 1. Strengthen protections for chaplains to carry out their ministry according to the tenets of their faith. How is that going to make people trust the military? 2. Codify language to instruct senior military officers, 3 and 4 stars, to make certain that they understand their primary duty to be ensuring the readiness of the armed forces, not pursuing a social engineering agenda. This direction should be reinforced during the Senate confirmation process. Orders and direction motivated by purely partisan motives should be identified as threats to readiness. 3. Reinstate service members to active duty who were discharged for not receiving the COVID vaccine, restore their appropriate rank, and provide back pay. 4. Eliminate Marxist indoctrination and divisive critical race theory programs, and abolish newly established diversity, equity, and inclusion offices and staff. 5. Restrict the use of social media solely for the purposes of recruitment and discipline any armed services personnel who use an official command channel to engage with civilian critics on social media. 6. Audit the course offerings at military academies to remove Marxist indoctrination, eliminate tenure for academic professionals, and apply the same rules to instructors that are applied to other DoD contracting personnel. 7. Reverse policies that allow transgender individuals to serve in the military. Gender dysphoria is incompatible with the demands of military service, and the use of public monies for transgender surgeries or to facilitate abortion for service members should be ended. How is that suddenly about abortion? Value the military family. Military service requires extreme sacrifices by families. 1. Support legislation to increase wages and family allowances for active duty enlisted personnel. No uniformed personnel should ever have to rely on social benefits like as food stamps or public housing assistance. Yes, it really says like as food stamps. 2. Improve base housing and consider the military family holistically when considering change of station moves. 3. Improve spouse employment opportunities and protections, including licensing reform, and expand childcare. 4. Audit all curricula and health policies in DoD schools for military families. Remove all inappropriate materials and reverse inappropriate policies. What's inappropriate? Who's deciding what's inappropriate? 5. Support legislation giving education savings account options to military families. Reduce the number of generals. Rank creep is pervasive. The number of 0 to 6 to 0 to 9 officers is at an all-time high across the armed services, above World War II levels, and the actual battlefield experience of this officer corps is at an all-time low. The next president should limit the continued advancement of many of the existing cadre, many of whom have been advanced by prior administrations for reason other than their warfighting prowess. This is mostly dry here, with the occasional bigotry seepage into the language. I love how they brought up abortion just out of the blue when they were talking about removing trans folk from the military. That was weird. Alright. The next section is titled DoD Intelligence. Catch you later. This recording and all other recordings related to this Project 2025 reading are copyrighted by Douglas Wayne Ricketts. All rights reserved. Unless you agree with me that Project 2025 sucks, then please feel free to use as much of this reading as you want. Thanks for listening.